welcome to a conversation about what really shapes school culture. This episode is about the small daily choices that we make with students. Choices that can either reduce them to a set of rules or remind them they are seen and valued. It's about the quiet stories students carry into our classrooms and down our hallways, and the difference a single caring adult can make when we lead with compassion instead of compliance and control. See, 2 years ago, I first shared these thoughts with a short clip and then also a podcast. The response was louder than I expected. Many people were encouraged, while others questioned or misunderstood the intent or the heart of what I shared. For a time, I grew silent. I wanted to really reflect about the response I had received. That pause clarified something important for me. The stories and the message still matter. They matter for the students. So this is a re-release, and it's not about revisiting controversy. It's about returning us all to our why. Reminding ourselves that connection is the heart of a healthy school culture, and that the need to lead with love has only grown more urgent. By the end of our time together, I hope you'll walk away with these 3 takeaways. Encouragement to see students more deeply, to notice the hidden stories behind the hoodies, the silence, and even the bravado. Practical insight on how connection organically breeds compliance, while relationships create the very order we often try to force. And finally, a renewed understanding that leadership sets the tone. When administrators and teachers model understanding, model compassion, trust becomes the campus default. See, connection comes before compliance. When students feel safe, when they feel seen and respected, following rules isn't something that we have to force. It's something that a student will choose. And we have to remember that the hoodie, the beanie, the AirPod, the cell phone, the silence, the anger, they're all a form of communication. And the communication is rarely about defiance. More often, it's about trauma or insecurity, or even a student asking, will you see me if I'm not okay? Leadership sets the tone. We have to model compassion. We have to model positive morning greetings. We have to model conversations with students before we push to the compliance. See, these convictions are grounded in research and in nearly 30 decades of walking hallways filled with students whose stories have shaped me, and they've taught me to notice what lies beneath the surface. They've taught me to seek to find what's really going on underneath that hood. And every day I'm reminded of my own story. I was once a high school dropout, and I can't help but wonder if someone had met me with compassion instead of simple compliance, would I have chosen a different path? I'm now going to take you back to where this all began. He was a 9-year-old 4th grader. He was new to Texas. He was new to everything. I saw it in his eyes, that look that students have when they're either new to a campus or when they're walking into your classroom for the first time. There's a bit of hesitation, but it's also met with a bit of hope. See, they're wondering and they're hoping at the same time, will this adult see me? Will this adult value me? Will this adult accept me? Will they embrace me? One morning he arrived and his shoe was falling apart. The whole soul was literally talking. Without hesitation, he took the tape dispenser off my desk and he began to wrap the tape around his shoe, strip after strip. He did so with by looking like someone who was used to taking care of his own problems. When he was finished, he looked up at me, bright eyes and all, and he said, "Fixed it." In that moment, my heart swelled. This wasn't a child who needed compliance. This was a child surviving with what he had. And what he needed more than anything was to be seen and accepted and embraced. Trust doesn't start with rules. It begins with respect. Castle reminds us that students build emotional regulation and behavioral consistency when they're in environments where they feel safe and connected. Connection isn't a bonus. It's the beginning. It's the baseline. See, after that first day, something shifted. Our bond deepened. He started bringing me wildflowers, roots and all. I mean, dirt still clinging and dangling. They weren't store-bought, they weren't perfect, but they were intentional. He was giving me what he had to offer. He was giving me gratitude. He was building a relationship rooted in reciprocity and care. Then one morning, then came the beanie and the hoodie. It was November, it was cool outside, and he walked in with a black beanie pulled far down below his eyebrows. He had the red hoodie tied tightly around his face. His curls, they weren't bouncing. They were must have been hidden, I assumed, until I realized no. His eyes were dim. The rules said take off your hood and remove your hat, but this wasn't about rebellion. This was about recovery. He wasn't covering his head. He was covering pain. See, the night before, his curls were shaved off of his head as punishment. So I chose to say, keep on the beanie and keep on that hoodie, because compliance wasn't the priority. His healing was. Eric Jensen, in Teaching with Poverty in Mind, reminds us that what we label as defiance is often a child's response to trauma or chronic stress. Can you imagine what this child had endured the night before? Jensen goes on to write, the best discipline is a strong teacher-student relationship. And see, that day, I chose the relationship, and thankfully, so did the campus administrator. Across nearly 3 decades, I have met hundreds of students whose quiet struggles remind me every single day that small things are big things to little people. There was a student who 2 years ago was waking late each night to feed one of the twin infants his mother had just given birth to. No wonder he was exhausted in class, falling asleep, and his grades were declining. Then there was a boy who came to school with a fresh haircut that he hated. It was too short and it was too sudden, and he sat paralyzed by embarrassment. Keeping his hood on wasn't about rebellion. It was about self-consciousness. Then there was a young man whose grades began to slide, and when I called him into a one-on-one conversation, he let me know that his dad was inpatient, receiving chemo, and wasn't expected to live. There was a student who seemed distant all last year. Teachers labeled him as disengaged until I asked why. Learned that he had just switched foster homes mid-year. And this past summer, he lost the only woman that mattered to him, a woman he had called grandmother. When he sat in my office, the dam broke. Years of silent tears began to fall. Then I'm reminded of a 5th grader I taught more than a decade ago who reached out recently just to say thank you for seeing me. She had endured trauma after trauma and found safety in my classroom. It suddenly made sense why all those years ago she showed up 2 weeks before school started to help me set up my classroom. During summer break? I mean, how many students do you know would do that? When I asked her why, she smiled and said, I've been looking for your car all week, Miss Green. See, her apartment was a stone's throw from the campus. I found out later that my room had been her refuge. The student who once impulsively took a soda off my desk later brought me a soda and a Laffy Taffy to make it right, because the relationship mattered more to her than the impulse. I attended her graduation just last year and could not have been prouder. Students burst into my office, sometimes even without knocking, asking for help in a class they're failing, because they know a relationship lives there and someone will listen before judging. I've watched AirPods come out of their ears and hoods come off their heads, midriffs be pulled down the minute they cross my doorway, not because I mandate it, but because the relationship and the respect invite it. See, every hallway carries untold stories just like the ones I've shared. There are kids who still sit alone in the cafeteria with no one to join them. There are kids who walk through an entire school day without a single peer or adult speaking directly to them. Can you imagine that? Going through your entire workday unnoticed. There are kids who woke in the morning to yelling, or kids who woke that morning to silence because the parent never even woke them up. They rose to their own alarm clock, pulling on clothes that weren't washed and heading out the door hoping no one would notice. These stories walk the hallways of campuses every single day, yet what we so often notice first are the hoodies, the beanies, the AirPods, the cell phones, the signs of what we call noncompliance. And we miss the things that matter most. We miss the sadness, we miss the loneliness, we miss the quiet hopelessness. As adults, we often ask for grace and compassion for ourselves when it comes to expectations and compliance. Yet as educators, we're called to give the same grace and compassion first, and we're failing. The students' needs must come first. That is where school culture is truly built, not in slogans or staff celebrations, not in posters hanging on the wall, but in how we treat the very kids we promised to serve. To every single educator and every leader, your legacy is being written in real time. You can be remembered as the adult who said, take off that hood or remove those AirPods. Or you can be the one who asked, did you eat this morning? You good? You okay? Or even who says, I'm so glad to see you today. I'm so glad you made it, even when they're 45 minutes tardy. One demands obedience. The other invites trust. Connection breeds compliance. It's not the other way around. I know this not only as an educator, but as that kid who once needed grace myself. Maybe if someone had offered it, I would have seen school as a haven, a place of acceptance, instead of dropping out when compliance outweighed compassion. School culture is not built by staff luncheons or adult celebrations alone. It grows or it withers in our everyday actions and interactions with students, in the moments when we choose to see them, hear them, and value them before we correct them. This is where iLEAD meets Misti Blue, where excellence meets empathy, where stories like these still bloom like wildflowers, roots and all. To the student who once walked in with that red hoodie over his black beanie, you planted something in me that I'll never forget. And I hope you're okay. And I hope you know how much you mattered to me then and how much you impacted me throughout these last few years. And to everyone listening, let's not just lead. Let's lead with love for the kids. Let's not just teach. Let's really see.